So, balance of the presentation is really just going to go through uh, this right here, and so we're going to start off with a little bit of different look because we don't typically talk about this. This graphic here represents the consolidated proposed budgets. This is every single thing that we are asking you to consider as board supervisors. So this total rectangle represents $1.9 billion of proposed spending. It's about a 9% increase over where we are this year. You've seen big chunks of this already. You've seen the utilities. We will talk about these smaller chunks here at the bottom, the mental health fund. We'll get into CVTA as we go through the CIP. The biggest piece of the consolidated is the school block. And so that's in here. You just saw Ms. Coker walk through that. That's $977 million of the total. So that represents not only what the general fund sends over and transfer, which we'll go through those specifics here in just a minute, but it also represents where they take direct receipt of the state revenue. So this kind of gets lost sometimes when we talk just about the general fund and not the consolidated picture. But you can see all in, all funds, over 50% of your consolidated is in that schools category. We've cut the orange block up here, which we'll spend the bulk of our time this afternoon on the general fund into other and then public safety. And you see it's almost a 50-50 split between that general fund, which is north of $500 million. That's everything else that we do. 13% of the total, or about half of that mix, is in the public safety block, and then everything else is in this slice here, about 15%. So you see the relative size of all of these components. This is, again, that consolidated number, $1.9 billion. We just finished up school board presentation, and just want to spend a little bit of time, because I think one of our themes here today has been sort of taking a longer view on a lot of these topics, and everything that we talk about, whether it's compensation, tax relief, staffing, we're gonna look at it from a longer range view. This is one of the visuals that's been sent around. I know each one of you has received this in your inbox more times than you wish. Mr. Durkin and I have gotten it once or twice. So we want to take a little bit of time, because, again, one of our themes has been recurring. This is not new. Nothing that we're going to go over here is new, but I think it is worthwhile adding it all together and really spending some time on the school issue as it relates to the county support, because that seems to be what gets called into question more often than not. And so we want to dive into that in great detail. And as we've said consistently over the years, and it's been touched on here today, in fairness, a little bit, It's not just a single way. It's not just the recurring transfer, that feeds from here into here. There's lots of ways, and it's 12 months a year. It's not just today, and it just doesn't end on April 5th when you all adopt. Mr. Carroll talked about it, coming back off cycle with a number of debt programs over the last couple of years. This unfortunate chart here is per pupil expenditures for regular day school for a handful of localities in the state. And the message that gets associated with this is, why are you not funding like these other localities, in short? So just want to spend a little bit of time on that, because I think it's a worthwhile topic. You all, Mr. Miller is going to be, he's the tip of the spear tomorrow night for his town hall. And I know this is going to be a question that's going to come up. So staff thought it was a good idea, walk you through this and just prepare you for some questions that you might receive when you go out into the community. First problem with this chart here is, you'll see it right up here, FY21. Everything else we talked about today is FY24. The largest investments from the general fund ever in the history of the school division have occurred since this date. This data is old. Not that there's a newer chart necessarily, but it's just an odd one to pick, because all the things that you've talked about, all the relationships that you've discussed here today, really build from this point forward, none of which is reflected in this chart. Shown right here. This is the total school budget. We just went through this. This is 977. This is the big blue block. That's where we are today. FY21 represented here, 769. That's a $207 million of investment collectively, not all locally, state and local, not on this chart. It doesn't give you the full picture. In addition to that, a lot of interesting friends we don't normally hang out with on here. Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, places that don't have a lot in common from a cost structure perspective of Chesterfield County. They're big localities, big school divisions, sure they are. But we put this in here, I think it gives you a sense. As you heard Ms. Coker say, schools, just like county, is a people-intensive business. And the major input into that is teacher salaries. So this is from that same report. This is 2021, same data source. Average annual salary for teaching positions, Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, $81,000, $76,000, $76,000. Chesterfield and Henrico, 52 and 54. That's an incredible difference when you're looking at this. This does not account for, talk about, recognize, admit to the fact that there's this massive difference in these Northern Virginia localities. And it's justified to a certain degree. The cost of living up there is tremendously higher. But another message in here that, really just never gets the light of day as much as we like to talk about it on the general government side is the average teacher salary in Chesterfield County is higher than Henrico. And as we'll get into for the modifications to the teacher pay plan that are included in this budget, it's going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. But we said, what if we wanted to be these guys? What if we want to go over here and we want to take this line and knock it on up? 20 cents on the tax rate to get to Loudoun County right here at 76,000. That's not even reaching for Arlington at 81. You need a 20-cent increase on the tax rate just to adjust our teaching positions to these Northern Virginia salaries. So when somebody says to you, we want to be this bar or that bar, this is the actual math that goes into that. 20 cents on the tax rate just to do this piece in FY21 dollars doesn't even include what's happened since then. This is another interesting topic because another thing that you all get hit on is the amount of local investment in schools. Well, these are composite indexes. This is from the state. This is from their website. What this means is the local ability to pay, the share of the total cost of schools that falls on the local shoulders. So, for example, Arlington here at 80% or 80 cents of every dollar. The state's looking at Arlington saying, based on your sales, your values, your incomes, all of these factors, we think you can cover 80% of the bill. So when you see a local cost chart that shows Arlington far above Chesterfield County, well, yeah, that's what the formula says you have to do. Chesterfield's at 35%. 35%. Henrico, 42. And then you see the same set of Northern Virginia folks at 65 and 54. That's a massive difference. Even that being said, even though we are lower, and it's been touched on here by all five of you really, the current proposal that's before you today is $170 million in excess of what the state says the local should contribute through this 0.35. $170 million higher the local investment, because that's a low number. I don't think that's a school division that any one of us would want to see. So the points are, when you see a local contribution chart and we are lower than some of these, yes, the formula drives that. Even though, that being said, we don't stick to the formula. We're $170 million over that figure if you just look at what the state says we should contribute. Remember this chart? Let's look at it in a little different way. We've said regular day spending, you see up there, 10,902. This takes that same chart and recalculates it for a peer group, very similar peer group. If you take all spending into account, we have said, and you all know this talking point well, these blue bars don't include debt service. They don't include investment into facilities and a number of other categories. All this data is on the same report. The blue bars stop about halfway across the page. Orange goes all the way to the other side. All staff did is we went to the orange bars and said, well, what does this look like if you take into account all of the ways that we support schools? And you all know when it comes to facilities, major maintenance, new facilities, bond referendums, all those things, they show up here in the orange side. They do not show up in the blue side. And that's where a lot of our emphasis has been. That's what a lot of the things that this board in particular has done for the school division are in the orange. You can see all the way across here, here's Chesterfield. We're $10,900 per student. If you throw everything in, we're at $14,400. Chart looks a little bit different when you throw in total spending when if you just look at the blue bars. In fact, we are at or in excess of everybody on here except for Spotsylvania and Norfolk, and we are only a handful of dollars behind them. In addition, there's been quite an email campaign. It says we're 130th in per pupil spending. We found that chart, but again, doesn't include the orange. When you add the orange in, we're not saying we're going to number one, but we're middle of the pack, 63rd instead of 130th. It's a little different story than a lot of the emails that you've gotten, a lot of the questions that you're going to field starting tomorrow night, a lot of those preconceived notions that people are going to walk in with. So we just thought it would be smart, take a little bit of time today and walk through these slides and give you, again, the full picture, the full context of all the ways this board has supported the school division. Any questions on any of those?
Yeah, I want to thank you for that analysis because I did receive an email today, fact, and so it stunned me when I received. It stunned me when I received it too. I said, "Can that be?" Because I spent a lot of time at the state level with VACO, the Virginia Association of Counties, and when you compare Henrico, for example, to Chesterfield, Henrico has a 4% mills tax and has had one for several years. Probably about 7-8 years, which is a couple of $100 million easily added into their school and county budgets as well. So I think sometimes people are not comparing. And when you look at, of course, another dynamic that is very important for me is, in fact, what's the report card? What's the results of the investment? And that's something I think people fail to look at. When you look at schools, and you look at their ranking in terms of what they're doing, how they're producing their client, if you will, their product. How is that product performing? And that's something that's very important to look at as well when you evaluate schools. I could throw out a lot of statistics, but I'm not one to just throw out statistics for embarrassing localities and others, but there's a lot of other factors that we need to consider when you look at funding. So I think that's a great perspective from 132. And also, let me throw in this mix as well. We know that from the state level, this is from the Virginia Department of Education, that the state has underfunded education by 4.3% or $15 billion since the last recession, the Great Recession. So that's another major draw on counties such as Chesterfield because we have such a higher expectation than many maybe in the state do. So I just want to apply that analysis.
Mr. Chairman, just to tag on to that, because Mr. Holland makes a very good point, and that is academic output. And we do need to see what exactly we are getting for the tax dollars, and taxpayers want to know that. And what we are getting in Chesterfield County for the money that we are spending is a 100% accredited school system. What we are getting in Chesterfield County is the top paid teacher county among counties in the region that are at least our peers. So I do think that there are some statistics that show that what you're getting in Chesterfield County is the best value for your tax dollar, and that's every taxpayer from someone who just started a first job all the way up to somebody who's retiring who's still paying taxes. So not to say these other statistics aren't important to keep an eyeball on year after year, but certainly when we compare ourselves to our peers in the region, I'm very comfortable with what we're putting out at the end of each academic year when we go and speak at our graduations and these folks enter the workforce. Wherever they're going, they are prepared for the workforce. And I'm proud of the work that not only our school board does, but our teachers day to day, our administrators in these school buildings, because they're doing yeoman's work. We have taken some time to get caught up here following the Great Recession. We have done that by growing the pie in this county through great economic development and great investment in public resources, and we will continue to do that. So thank you, Mr. Holland, for bringing that up.
Mr. Engel.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think the slide that shows that we're spending $170 million more than what the state formula would say we should spend is a huge statement, and it goes back to how many teachers and how many school personnel we fund in the classroom 100%. without state dollars. And it also shows what unfunded mandates cause localities to have to pay. So I think that number, if the state was to set their budget or set what they're giving to our schools, and then we were to use that composite index every year, that would be a much different story. But we all agree that schools are important. Schools do mean quality of life for all of our citizens in Chesterfield County, and we do make a significant investment, much greater than what the state would require us to make, because we do value it as being that important to our citizens.
Mr. Chairman, just one quick comment that I might add that I forgot to mention that I thought of, and I think this for our newer board members, is the fact that 2 years ago we invested in SRP, the teacher retirement system.
I think that's coming up in the next slide,
Oh,
Doug.
excuse me.
Dr. Miller.
Mr. Chair, where to begin? I want to say, Mr. Holland mentioned that he received 1 or 2 emails. I've received well over 100 emails, and very much accusatory, in that you're not fully funding the schools. Well, first define fully funding, because I don't even know what that means, to fully fund. I can tell you that it is, as Mr. Carroll is saying, it's not an unlimited amount of money, unfortunately, that we can just throw at the schools. The truth is, can we do a good job in that they are able to getting their biggest bang for the buck? The schools is all about, by definition, job training. And so when those statistics were thrown out into the community, I know that there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics. And so I'm appreciating what you're putting out right now. What is concerning to me is that Ms. Coker and the superintendent didn't stick around for this part of the conversation. And I think that they needed to be part of this conversation to recognize the fuller picture. And that's concerning to me. I'm glad. So I'm glad to hear it. And so I appreciate you to be able to be a bridge. We are doing the very best that we're possibly doing. And this is coming from someone who's a former high school English teacher. And I worked for the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and I taught. And let me tell you, it is one of the most difficult jobs out there. And to be quite honest with you, it's probably why I'm not teaching today. Because being a high school English teacher with 45 students in the class it's an impossible job. So our job here is to make sure that we fully fund as defined by the biggest bang for our buck, and so that we can do it effectively, and that our teachers can do it joyfully, and they can do it skillfully. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I know there's more to come, but I will say in the superintendent's defense and in the chair's defense, we've been having these conversations behind the scenes with them to make them aware of all this stuff. So they are aware of these slide decks, painfully aware. But I will say that, we know from talking with people in the community how important schools are. Everybody knows that. And I do believe that these numbers and what we've done over the last couple of years, I think show or should show the community how important we realize it is. We know in the future that number that the schools has proposed today is going to go up a lot more because of the bond referendum. As we build those schools and we staff those schools, and as growth continues in Chesterfield County, their needs are going to continue to grow. And as Mr. Winslow said, we've put some things in place, such as landing a company like Lego to come to Chesterfield County and many other economic development projects that will help us with this tax burden in the future, and it will help us be able to fund these things for our community. And, we're working the best that we can. And again, we have a great relationship with the schools, and that's going to continue. Thank you.
Dr. Miller, your commentary is right on point. It's about that fuller picture. It's about the context, and a lot of these parts of the message just don't get included at this time of year. So we try to take some time. This is just another example of that. You summed it well. I won't repeat it. This is right out of a county schools presentation. And I think the part that's concerning is 44% would have generated additional $27 million. And this gets routed around and people buy into this. It generates and feeds into the email campaigns that you all get peppered with. The reality is, this is not a funding formula. This is a simple diagram that has been used in the past to communicate to folks in a simple way how your dollar is diced up. The reality is, funding of the school division in every single one of the departments that's represented in this room is a much more nuanced business that can be captured here. And using this kind of language and putting it out there for general public consumption without the context that I'm going to walk through in just a second, it is really unfortunate because it does generate a lot of the emotion and the understanding that you all are communicating here today. All we did is the next slide. So again, these are from budget documents, county budget documents over a number of years. But when you take it and you break it down into the actual percentages, first and foremost, 44% is not 44%, it's 43.6. It matters when you're talking about millions of dollars. But we went back, we built it from FY21 to FY23, and then we actually did some actual math here and said, okay, if you take all the things that we do for schools and we put it into this and turned it into a quasi-funding formula across the board, what would those adjustments be? And so let's just take first and foremost the accusation in FY23 that money's taken out of the school column is simply not true. You see everything is even across the board here from a percentage breakdown perspective, except for capital. Last year's budget, you all sent reserves, project balances, other things to the CIP to fund capital needs on the county side. It flows through the general fund. It's not new revenue. It's budget mechanics. We could do that. We could delay it and do it a week after you adopt the budget just so that we can have this clean, but that's a silly game. There's no need to do it. But a simple drill down, any effort to look at this would have seen that this capital line is where the difference is. It's not that the school line goes down, is that the capital line goes up. And it goes up not at the detriment of the school division or public safety, which is, shows a small decrease as well. It's simply the mechanics of passing through those one-time dollars through the general fund. I don't have a way to get it from the general fund to the capital fund unless it goes through these mechanics here. If you recalculate, and as Mr. Holland pointed out, SRP payment, which creates expenditure capacity, just use that simple example. I won't even get into the 2 or 3 moving pieces that are in here. But if you all create expenditure capacity by paying down a long-term liability for anyone, schools in this example, it doesn't show up here. It's not more revenue, but is it real purchasing power that the school division or anybody else has to pay teachers or do more things or pay debt service? Absolutely it is. Is it reflected here? Absolutely it's not. Is that misleading? Absolutely it is. So let's look at what the actual record is. The record of this board the last 3 or 4 years, coming off of a year in FY21 when we had COVID. Mr. Durkin, I think, created 3 budgets in 3 days. So, this is not a full 4-year period of time where you have had revenues working in your favor. You have been able to do all things I'm going to walk through in a challenging environment. But on your watch, starting in FY21, the single largest investment in major maintenance, schools major maintenance in the county's history, $58 million. The debt service associated with that is paid through that local transfer. So not only did we, move forward on this debt package, you do pay the bill. $375 million, largest bond referendum for schools in the county's history. $79 million in school compensation the last 2 budgets. $79 million last 2 budgets. It's not in here, folks. It's not on this chart. $79 million just in teacher compensation, not in that chart. Largest recurring transfer, $20 million. We'll come back to this in a second. But these we could have gone on and on. But these are headlining major accomplishments just in 3 years' time, coming out of COVID, uncertain economic times. We started off in the opening, said, this is a year-round exercise. There's a lot of things that we do for the school division. I'm going to read all of these, actually. I don't normally do that. $27 million supplemental retirement program. That created that $10 million capacity we just talked about. $8.54 million of shared services. This is funding for SROs, all the other items. It's not in the transfer number. But you have $8.5 million of real county services that tax dollars pay for. Doesn't show up in the schools column because we don't bill them, if you will, and then have it come back. That's an expensive thing. You pay fund balance on that. But $8.5 million, it doesn't even show up in any of the things that we have talked about here today. There was a $1.2 million increase in that bill, if you will, for shared services for fiscal 24. As salaries gone up, one of the things that we said to schools very early on is, forget that. We're just going to eat that on our side. We're not going to take it off the top of the transfer. We're just going to absorb that increase. We recognize that you are in a tough financial position. Hasn't been talked about a single time. $2.6 million of additional shared services. We have to do a cost allocation plan for federal reporting, grants, other things. That report, which is done by a third party, says there's $2.6 million of shared services we don't even include or charge for in the $8 million number. School access road improvements. This is part of your CIP. School turnarounds, safe access, other egress points to schools in our CIP. County dollar doesn't show up in any of these transfer mechanics. VPSA issuance for 2 middle schools, $136 million. That's really the reciprocal, if you will, from the SRP paydown. You will pay that debt service bill. Pandemic, $53 million. There was zero requirement. Schools got their own direct aid from DC. You all, as a body, took $53 million of your allocation and dedicated it to schools for everything from some of the summer school stuff that's been talked about here to paying for capital projects, particularly Fawn Creek Middle and some of the other buildings. That was an elective decision. $53 million doesn't show up in any of the things we've talked about here today. Security enhancements and locker pod conversions. Got a request from the superintendent. You all paid a $5 million bill in December out of your year in, paid that in 2 very, very worthwhile causes, great programs, not included in any of the numbers we've talked about. Shared warehouse in our CIP last year. Serves both sides, no ask of the school division. We're going to talk about this in your CIP this year. Enterprise financial system, the financial system, the backbone of our organization from a financial perspective, everything from payroll to budget to accounting, you name it. $13 million in cash over 2 years, no ask of the school division. We could have very well sent money over, sent it back, had it run through the transfer mechanics. Didn't do it. It's silly. There's no need to, but it's still very real. Fund balance contributions. You all pay the full 8% fund balance contribution. You don't take anything off the top of what is provided to schools. That's $2 million since FY21. Facility site acquisition, Upper Mag. Going to put schools there, Spring Rock Green. Hopefully there's some benefits for the school division there as well. No ask. That's real money coming out the door. Doesn't show up in any of those stats we've gone through. So let's go back. We go back a couple slides. $20 million was the largest increase on record for the recurring transfer. Well, that record didn't have very long to live because you did it in 18 and 22 at 18 million. You did it in 23 at 19 million. And this year it sits at 20 million. You've broken the record each of those budgets. In FY21, the transfer went up $8.5 million. The rest of the budget went down $50 million. Everybody else, $50 million cut. School transfer, we were able to preserve at plus 8.5 on a recurring basis. The average, and this has been touched upon, superintendents, right? The average from 17 to 20, $8.4 million. In a year, saddled with a pandemic, you broke that record by $100,000. Since then, economy comes back. You got 3 consecutive years besting each other for a $20 million recurring increase in the local government transfer as part of this FY24 proposed budget. This doesn't include the $1.2 million. Again, that's expenditure purchasing power. This number doesn't include the SRP contribution. I could go on and on. So this figure here, 20, what you saw in the school slides was at 17 million. As we've talked about publicly with them everywhere we can, committee, it's a process. $17 million was the number from a year ago Mr. Durkin provided to them. their best guess at that time. Since then, we've got a lot of economic data in hand that's able to help us refine that number. In addition, we have pulled back on expenditures that we would have liked to have made in FY24, pushed them to January the 1st to create expenditure capacity on our side to take 17 million to 20. So it's +3 from what you saw here. So if you do this math problem, 3 on top of the 17 to 20, another 5 million in one-time operating that we believe we can match up to one-time type issues in the school division. This is something that has to be stepped down off of over the next couple of years, but this takes them to 15 in one-time money, which is equivalent to what is in this budget. So it's not an increase in one-time money, and it is something that has to be worked off of, but it is sustainable for fiscal 24. These two items here today cut that deficit in half. Hence Mr. Ingles' point in the letter asking the state to meet us in the middle on the $16 million. Any questions before I jump into the Durkin pyramid?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Winslow.
Mr. Harris, so I was just looking at, and the reason I asked for these numbers, and I appreciate those being provided to the board, was the full transfers to the school division over the last several years, and just to see if this, whatever was remaining, if it was 16 or 8, I see it's 8 million now, was a a reachable number, whatever that gap was that we were expecting from the state. And I'm looking here just the differences between these years. I mean, it looks like between fiscal year 22 and 23, it went up by $43 million, and then fiscal year 24, we're working on. So, I mean, it seems to me we should receive that. I mean, I don't have my crystal ball here, and I don't know that Ms. Spillman does either, but it seems like $8 million is certainly within reach when the House and Senate convene and that conference committee gets to work and rolls up its sleeves.
Yeah, so I think there's as you've heard today, there's a lot of scenarios. Some are really bad, some are pretty good. But I think with some work that's been going on, there's been meetings even this week trying to refine the expenditure side a little bit. Hopefully, the lobbying effort collectively statewide lends to some additional revenue. I don't think $8 million is, a bridge too far if you use those two factors to combine them together. So we remain hopeful, but the good news today is the gap is half of what it was, at the beginning of this month.
Matt, isn't it also true that, if for some reason, and we'll cross our fingers and say prayers, that the state actually gives us more than $8 million, that $5 million number that we talked about having to draw back in the future, we may be able to start that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think staffs and administrations all agree that if there's a balancing figure, it comes out of here. But I think this is a safe and responsible number for fiscal 24, given all that we're seeing. But yeah, if they came through at +10, I think everyone would love to see this drop to 3.
Thank you.
So we'll move on. I'm going to turn the mic over to Gerard here in just 1 second. But this is kind of the concept for building fiscal 24. So we start off with the base budget, of course. We've just walked through this slice with education. Like we said at the beginning of the day, like we said yesterday, this is a budget built on and. It is all of these things, and it is a very comprehensive and diverse tax relief package. So that's the next chapter of the story, and then we will continue to build all the way up to the tip top. So if there aren't any questions, I will turn it over to Gerard.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is one part of what I've now just realised has been my pyramid, apparently. So, to Mr. Harris's point about the and component of this budget, we've went through all the education components, but another part of this budget is, investments in education, compensation, and tax relief. One of the things that we have made sure as we build every budget every year and throughout our 5-year plan is that, in times gone by, we have asked our taxpayers to step up and help our operations when times were difficult. The flip side of that coin is that when things are in a better position economically, that we return that back to the taxpayers. And as I walk through each of these tax relief components, this board's investment in tax relief is the largest tax relief package that's ever been done by this county. And it's targeted relief, but it's also, more importantly, sustainable relief. We never want to put ourselves or recommend to you as the governing body to implement tax cuts that we cannot sustain. That is one of the parts of our 5-year plan, is that if we put that proposal in there, we make sure that it's sustainable throughout that entire period. And I'm pleased to say that this budget does do exactly that. The other component, as you'll see we go through this, is it's both recurring and there are some one-time things in nature. We are talking today about how budgeting is a year-round process. At your direction to us as staff, finding those efficiencies and doing those budget amendments throughout the year is, if there are opportunities to do tax relief throughout a fiscal year, find those opportunities and provide it where possible. And that the actions that you have taken as the board have certainly made that demonstrably clear. So the first part is tax relief for elderly and disabled. Prior to fiscal year 21, the net worth component of this programme had been unchanged since 1998, and the income qualifications hadn't kept pace with inflation and hadn't been adjusted since 2013. So recognising that inflation was starting to bite again, reaching 40-year highs, you all took the recommendation to adjust the income brackets in calendar year 2022 to match the Social Security Administration's cost of living adjustments. This almost became a policy of the board that we will match that moving forward. In 2022, that was adjusted by 6%. For tax year 2023, you adjusted the income thresholds by the 8.7% COLA adjustment, but also took the chance to adjust those net worth requirements that hadn't been changed since 1998. And you can see those relief brackets at the 100%, 60% and 35% levels, with the net worth threshold going from $350,000 to $388,500. This is not a phenomena that's unique to us. It's happening nationwide. Residential revaluation rates are higher than they have been in historical terms. In 2022, that went up by 11.9%. I will walk through the mechanics of what's happened with the real estate rate over the last few years. But this year again, it has been higher than our average, long-run average, and has been reaching about 8.8% for this current year. So the real estate rate, you can see a chart there going back to 1997. With that 11.9% increase that we saw in 2022, you enacted a 3-cent reduction in last year's budget from 95 cents to 92 cents. Based off of the revaluation figures that we received in January from the assessor, this budget proposes another 1 cent reduction in that rate to 91 cents. Cumulatively, that's about a $20 million relief that has been given back to the taxpayers, going from that 95 cents to 91 cents. This is something we do relief both in a kind of recurring and, coming back to that point earlier, of a one-time nature. As part of our fiscal year 2022 year-end adjustments, you created a reserve for tax relief for $10 million. Based off of what we'd seen as personal property values over the last year. I'll go through that in a few slides, but those have come down dramatically compared to where they were last year. So we've been working with the Treasurer and her office to find a way of providing one-time relief for the upcoming June 5th billing cycle for real estate. The proposal is to do an across-the-board reduction to people's real estate tax bills for that June 5th billing by 5%. That will cost approximately $12.6 million. That is higher than the $10 million that you all had put in reserves, but we have, based on the revaluations, more than anticipated what we were going to bring in for fiscal year 23.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is, if there's a third recurring theme in here, it's a promise is kept. And this board, made very, very clear, is really all the way back to this time last year, that surpluses that came from the oddities that have happened in the property valuation cycle that we've been in, that we would find a way to give that back to the folks that paid it, to reimburse the folks that make all of this possible. And that's exactly, I don't want that to get lost here. This isn't, found money or anything else. This is a promise kept, and you'll see that theme recur through here in many, many places. And we're able to do this, for the citizens of Chesterfield County without spending a large postage bill either.
So with that,
Pause 1 second. Dr. Miller.
Just a quick question around that. When you're talking about real estate tax bill, are you only talking about real estate meaning homes, or are you talking also commercial?
All real property.
All real property, which would include commercial?
Yes,
correct?
sir.
What percentage of this relief would end up in commercial hands as opposed to our residents?
Roughly speaking, we're at that 80-20 threshold.
Okay, so about 80% would be to the to homes, and the 20% would be the commercial.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So with that estimated cost of about $12.6 million, that would generate an average savings on the real estate bill by $89. Moving on to the business community, they are the real job drivers of our community. One of the revenue sources that we have is our business and professional license tax. In fiscal year 2023, you all took the amendment to raise that threshold at which businesses pay that tax from $300,000 to $400,000. That meant that 2/3 of all businesses located within the county were now exempt from that tax. They pay that flat fee of $10, but they would not pay taxes on those amounts above those thresholds. That was the first amendment that had been done since 2017. The average relief for all those businesses that were above those gross receipt thresholds was about $2,000 on average, and the total cost of that package was about $500,000. As part of the budget that is before you today, the proposal is to again raise that threshold from $400,000 to $500,000. That would provide an additional exemption to 500 businesses, and that's going to an estimated annual cost of about $600,000, and it's about 86% of all businesses now in the county would be exempt from paying this tax. So I'm going to spend a little more time on this one. There's a lot on information on this slide with personal property taxes. One of the things that this board has done is increase the exemptions from people paying that tax from $1,000 to $1,500. They would get 100% relief on their personal property tax bills. That was the first amendment to that since 1998. Over 14,300 vehicles ended up being exempt from paying personal property tax as a result of that action alone. One of the things that we apply every year to bills is the personal property tax relief rate, recognizing that the values of personal property, not just here but across the entire nation, had been increasing due to kind of supply chain kinks. That threshold has been going down. It was originally incepted in the late 90s. We get a flat amount from the state every single year to cover the cost of that relief, about $41 million. As more people move into the county, there's more vehicles in the county, the amount of relief that we're able to grant over an increasing amount of vehicles base in the county has been decreasing. I believe originally it was in the 70% range, and we were now down into the 40s, recognizing that the values of those vehicles were going up and the resultant tax bill. We took the unprecedented step of actually increasing that relief rate. We still got the $41 million from the state, but essentially what happened was the county ate the additional relief amount. It went from 46 to 55. That was a relief of about $22 million on top of that 41 that we had got from the state. The state didn't give us that $22 million. The actions that you took provided that relief back to the citizens that were facing those higher assessments.
And I think this goes to that core principle that we keep talking about, the and concept. This slide and the one-time real estate credit, we're able to funnel significant tax relief back to the citizenry that has paid it and not dent your rate structure moving forward. The last thing that we want to do is kind of have that Northern Virginia phenomenon where rates bounce up and down 8-10 cents depending on what the conditions are. This is a predictable rate structure, provides targeted relief when it's needed, and if we hit a rough patch, you have it then trimmed 5, 10, 10 cents off of your rate that you're going to need to generate dollars in those leaner years. So, and in addition to that, the one-time credit that we talked about doesn't impact your ability to deliver on the operational needs that are before you, namely the school division, public safety, compensation, all of these things, because it's going to actually hit you from a budgetary perspective in fiscal 23, June of this year. So you are still, at full octane for fiscal 24. So we're able to do all of these things and deliver on those operational promises because you have a tax relief policy guided by, board mandates to staff that has been tailored to do both of those things.
Sorry to interrupt. So what would be the average coming back to the individual?
On which piece?
On the real estate.
So real estate, between the two pieces, the 5% one time and the 1 cent rate cut, you're at $125 million on average, $125 on average for the June bill that's getting ready to go out. That's why if you adopt on April 5, the bill is due back June 5, that's an average $125 savings. And it's important. It's, we're not doing anything silly. It's applied directly to the bill. There's no need for the public to do anything. You do have a series of public hearings and other things to enable the ordinance to do what we're talking about. You'll just start that process tonight, but the timing works out well, so all that can be in place for the treasurer to do her part of it. But the average household, $125.
And that's including the property and the real estate?
That's just the real property, the two components of the real property. This personal property chapter that Gerard's going through is on top of that. It's on top of the B-poll. It's on top of the senior relief.
Okay. Thank you.
But to be clear, that's all one time at this point. It's not recurring, so it's not something that's cutting our ability to be able to fund operations in future years. It's really more or less a rebate back to our citizens for the additional, even though we've had the greatest tax rate relief, our citizens' taxes have actually gone up over the last couple of years, and this is a way to give back to the citizens that paid in a larger amount in the past couple of years.
Matt, one last follow-up. Later on tonight, we're going to, I believe, have an ordinance that we're going to propose to allow for us to do this type of tax relief. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. But once that ordinance is in place, then it'll provide for a future board of supervisors, whether it's us later on in the year or a future board, because the ordinance is in place, then if they have a surplus at the end of the year and they want to do a similar type tax relief measure, they'll have the authority to do that, right?
Yes, sir.
So it's important for us to move that tool forward, not just for this board, but for other boards in the future. And certainly a board in the future could turn around and say, yeah, we don't want that tool anymore, and they get rid of it. But it also gives us an opportunity, and I might be getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to say it anyway. We don't know what whether or not we're going to have another surplus this year or not. But if we do, then we will be positioned, if we have the monies, to do a similar exercise in the second half of the year. Is that right?
We've certainly added a tool to the toolkit and gives you all additional flexibility. I mean, I think in the way that the economy has unfolded over the last 2 years, adding another tool so that everything doesn't have to be through the rate, I think is a very wise move.
Thank you.
One of the other things that was enacted with last year's budget was to halve the vehicle registration fee from $40 to $20. For a family that has 3 cars, that would be $60 worth of relief just from that act alone. We also take all 100% of that revenue, about between $7 and $8 million, and move it to transportation projects in the CIP in its entirety. We don't keep that within the general fund for day-to-day kind of type expenses for all the departments. It moves completely over to the CIP to fund transportation-related projects.
Gerard, in accordance with that, we generally use that money for, certainly for some sidewalk projects that are in need in some of the older neighborhoods in Chesterfield County. But the other reason why we cut it, too, is because now with the CVTA in place, that the county has now got a funding stream coming in, a pretty big funding stream, to help fund transportation to the tune of, I think, our numbers right now to date, if I remember correctly, is about $64 or $69 million since the creation of the CVTA that it's come on our local allocation of that 50%. So it's, it was right for us, in my opinion, to cut that back and reduce it by the $8 million, considering that with the fuel sales tax that we're getting from CVTA and the sales tax, it's providing for us an avenue to do transportation projects and actually cut something that was added before for that reason back the way we did. Thank you.
So I know that personal property assessment notices have been going out recently. I got my own in the mail last week. One of the things that we have seen this year is a kind of normalization of the values of personal property across all types of classes. Matt mentioned it earlier, but we have it here on the slide. There's been a $1 billion decrease in the assessed value of personal property located within Chesterfield. That is going to result in significantly lower personal property tax bills for our citizens. But again, back to that mantra of where are ways that we can find and generate relief for the citizens. We were working with the Treasurer in her office to determine what the rate for that personal property tax relief should be for the upcoming billing cycle. It is stepping down from that 55 to 50%. But like last year, that is still going to be relief provided back to the citizens. To bring it back again, I'll re-emphasize it, we get the same number from the state every single year. It hasn't changed in 20 plus years. But with this 50% relief, the actions that you will take will generate relief back to the citizens anywhere between about 13.5 to about 15.3 million once that kind of final billing process is played out. So we are going to be giving back in excess of over $50 million of relief from that state money, plus the relief that you will provide through that action. And then finally, we got a notification from the Commissioner's office that there was one area where the personal property values were kind of wonky, for lack of a better term, and that was in boat assessments. They were, I believe, was it 10, 20%, give or take?
It's a 23% reduction.
Yeah. So she asked for concurrence with the board to do a kind of relief methodology on that rate that would generate about $336,000 on tax savings. It would keep those bills neutral with last year's amount. If there was no assessment methodology adjustment, the assessed values of those have went up, which would have generated significantly higher bills for boat owners within the county.
Mr. Winslow.
Mr. Chairman, just a question on that. 'Cause I recall getting some emails and calls about boat assessments. I don't know if it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but something changed with the assessments of boats in the county. 'Cause I know because we got all those calls. And so I guess that wasn't that effort also in the Commissioner of Revenue's office. So I'm just trying to understand and follow the bouncing ball here. I think the assessment methodology was changed, and now we're going to reduce the rate. Is that at which it's taxed? Is that what's happening?
Mr. Winslow, so first and foremost, the assessment methodology is the purview of the Commissioner's office. So what you're recalling from a few years back is a change in the way that watercraft were assessed. So that did result in an increase in bills, and as you point out, there was associated email traffic on that topic. What has happened here is sort of that supply chain issue has hit the watercraft category, as we saw with personal vehicles last year. So what the Commissioner is recommending doing is putting a relief factor on, not changing the assessment methodology, but placing a additional relief factor. Obviously, PPTRA does not apply to that category, so it's effectively like a PPTRA adjustment on those higher values, and that way, again, we don't have to change the rate. We're able to normalize that. I think the goal here is that boat bills that go out will be unchanged. Obviously, if you bought a new boat, it doesn't apply, but same boat should have a very similar bill to last year because of this adjustment. And then when we get into the budget 1 year from now, hopefully things normalize like they've done on personal vehicles, and then they can be back to 100% of that previous assessment methodology.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, what percent increase? You said 23% increase or decrease in both assessments?
What is being proposed would adjust the new market values, if you will, downward by approximately 23%.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So moving on to the last slide of this component of the tax relief part of the pyramid. This is a nice snapshot of all the relief measures that this board has taken over the last few years. You can see it has been a multi-pronged effort across the business residential communities. With VPO, again, that two-phase adjustment over the last 2 years with the adjustment that's going to be happening as part of this proposed budget. The cumulative relief on those two actions is about $1.1 million. On real estate, the pre-21 scene was about 95 cents per 100. This budget takes that down to 91 cents per $100 of assessed value. That's $20 million of relief. Tax relief for the elderly, disabled and veterans, increasing those thresholds has provided an additional relief to those eligible participants of over $9.2 million. That action from raising the 100% personal property threshold from $1,000 to $1,500 has provided $300,000 worth of relief. The vehicle registration fee being cut in half has generated $8 million in annual relief for vehicle owners. And then the personal property tax relief that we've just discussed. Last year, the relief that the board was able to supplement over that 41 was $22 million. This year is going to fall in between that 13.5 to about 15.3, give or take, once those final calculations have been done. So on a recurring basis, and the total relief that's been enacted by this board is about $38.6 million of relief per year.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just make one comment, and that is on BPOL. As you know, small businesses make up the backbone of the county, and we're at, I think, 10,500 or so businesses now in Chesterfield County. We've seen a real increase in that growth over this last several years. And now, my understanding is the bulk of businesses in the county who operate, and a lot of them are mom and pop shops. They pay their $10 for their business license, and we have, of course, in Chesterfield County, a one-page business license form application. So they pay their $10, and they're then able to do business, and they don't have to fool many of them with this gross receipts tax, which if you have to fill this document out and deal with this every year is just a real pain for a lot of people, and so when you have this kind of relief that exempts a significant number of businesses in the county, it really cuts down on the time that people have to spend. And for those of us who own businesses in this county and who cut a payroll every 2 weeks for multiple employees, this is a significant time savings at a time of year when we need it most. So I just want to say to my fellow board members, thank you, and to staff for putting this together, because this is a big deal for people.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I fully concur. And, my thought is moving toward the future, maybe eliminating that $10 fee. I'm not sure what that covers. Why pay the $10 fee? It's so insignificant, seemingly, for the small business owners. So that would be one thing to process in the application, maybe, which should be functionatory anyway.
And BPOL is still I don't want to get it lost. I think the $10, we happy to give you some background on that, but it reminds you that the BPOL program, everything up to $15.7 million is a general revenue, but that's been fixed by board policy for quite some time. Dollars over that 15.7 go directly into economic development initiatives and more so into transportation. So it has been a sort of quiet but invaluable source for us for transportation needs for the last, better part of 10 to 15 years. So happy to have further conversations on that. But yeah, 86% of businesses at the $10. But yeah, don't forget the purchasing power of that revenue. And that was a deal that was struck with the business community at that time, that those would be two acceptable uses over the capped revenue.
Thank you. In addition to the remaining $20 vehicle registration fee, and of course, we didn't have CBTA when that came into fruition. That might be that's approximately $8 million, I think, a year. So that might be an opportunity to, as CBTA increases, there may be an opportunity to offset that $20 for each car owner in the county. So just throwing out as a future opportunity to maybe take that to zero.
Yes, sir. So next stack in the pyramid is compensation. And the first chart here really walks you through, and I won't go through each part of this, but reinforces the concept that nothing that we're doing here today happens in a single leap or bound. We have utilized the 5-year planning structure, opportunities like this here today, state a goal, and then divide it up into 2, 3, 4 pieces, whatever it takes to get something done. And nowhere has this been more applicable to our compensation goals. Compensation pressures, Ms. Martin and her team are here. They have done yeoman's work in order to do the market studies and to keep us as competitive as possible over the last 3 to 4 years, and they deserve a lot of credit for all the things that are on the screen here today. But just a quick reminder, we did do a full market study, and there's a lot of compensation headlines out there right now, but I don't know that any of them are rooted in real market data like we endeavor to do with our plans collectively, county and schools. And I think that really, is based in something real. It's not just tied to an inflationary component or whatever. And each particular choice is tied to that job category. It is a market-driven plan. I just think that that's not something that you're going to see in the newspaper when you pick it up on a daily basis. Our approach here is different. The dollars are the same or more in a lot of cases, but the way we went about it is very different. So 2 years ago in FY21, the amendments, so we actually did it before, that revenues came back to life as COVID sort of got under control. You established the modern public safety pay plan. The first piece of that went in, and again, the tail end of 21. We came back and did market adjustments of public safety pay in FY23. So that 21 really covered 22, but just the timing was a little bit, we were able to do it sooner than we otherwise would have. That's where we established two, again, promises kept, that the public safety pay step is something that happens regardless. You all have established reserves to make sure that is something that we can keep up with, even in very lean years. And secondly, that we fixed, unlike I think anybody else in the region, the compression that was really prevalent in our public safety ranks was fixed with that first part of the plan. And everything that we've done since then has been market adjustments, but then also the compression adjustment associated with that so that we don't go back where we were before fiscal 21. That being said, the workforce is far beyond just our sworn responders. So in FY23, we did the first phase of the general government pay plan, phase 1, at $15 million, recognizing that we couldn't get it all done in 1 year. We would come back in 24. We'll touch on that in just a second. In addition to that, again, there's quieter ways that we do compensation. You look at the work Ms. Martin and her team have done around career development plans, 116 of those, before this term. Right now at FY22, that's up to 190. Those aren't dollars that are shown in one particular line item or another, but it's a performance-based way to compensate folks. As they get more skills, more training, they're providing a better service, we compensate accordingly, and you see just the tremendous growth there. $2.9 million awarded through that program. Again, that's a very merit-based system, but doesn't get a whole lot of attention throughout the course of the year. In addition to that, we still have our merit-based increases. Again, they have to earn it. They go through the process to review that. That's been 2% from 21, 22, and 23. So what's in this budget as it relates to compensation? The number one thing, again, back to the concept of no surprises. We've been talking about phase 2 of the general government pay plan is the number one priority for this plan since last year, and we are delivering on that with this proposal here today. Another $8 million going into the general government phase 2 pay plan. As part of that, the new floor for an hourly employee on a full-time basis will be raised to $16. You know, if you've been through a Chick-fil-A drive-through, you know that's kind of the new mark. I think that goes up every time that I got there, just $17. But bottom line, we had to move that up. It's been an iterative process, and we're able to get that in place now. This phase 2 deals with a lot of our line employees, a lot of our clerical, administrative staff that certainly will benefit greatly from these phase 2 investments. In addition to that, we are raising the annual merit to 3.5%. That's the largest in quite some time. We would like to continue to be able to nudge that upward, but that's certainly a decent jump from where we were last year at 2%. And again, one of the things that we've done in that vertical budgeting concept, we have moved the merit date, not in this budget, but in prior years, to January the 1st. On the public safety side, that's a very noisy market, as we all can recognize. There's lots of competition for little amounts of staff that want to go into a lot of those areas, so we have to stay at the front of the market, and I'm proud to say this budget is very responsive to the market conditions that our first responder agencies face. So a couple of things here. We will honor the board's promise on the step that will go in July of 23. That's 2.25%. That is the definition as defined in the public safety pay plan. Beginning in July of 23, we will make a bold move and raise starting pay for our first responders by 10%. That includes not only the police department, the fire department, the sheriff's office, but also our 911 call takers, who are certainly a vital link in our first responding chain. They really are the beginning of that process, and we're happy to be able to extend it to them as well. Not wanting to go back on where we were prior to fiscal 21, there's a 10% compression adjustment that will go into place in January of this year. Again, that helps it follows through on the promise, also helps to create some capacity to deal with a lot of the other needs that the organization has. That will have, and it keeps Mr. Durkin up at night, that will have some economic impact for us budgetary in fiscal 25, but we are recognizing that. We're putting that on the table. And again, no surprises. We come back in here next year. That will be one of the first things that we talk about as we annualize that cost. And at this time, I think we would like to, and here is, this is a small chart, but we're going to plaster this everywhere we can. These are the pay step plans for some of our bigger job categories. So we've got a police officer in here and a teacher. So the teacher is on the left-hand side as you're looking at it. The peach boxes represent where we are relative on each step of the program for teachers as compared to our closest competition. So if the peach is on the left-hand side, that's the Chesterfield piece, we are the market leader for that particular step. And as you can see, with the investments that were talked about, the 7% increase in teacher pay as partially funded by the state, it continues our market position as the pay leader for teachers in the region, in the Central Virginia region. That was backed up by school zone data, which we walked through a little while ago. So absolutely maintain our position there. I'm proud to announce that on the sworn side of things, we're moving into the lead position here with this 10% increase. And you can see for a police officer, once they've completed the training, a very, very competitive position, again, against our closest competition. And as you walk through the duration of that step plan, we are extremely competitive with them. So we feel like we're in a great position. We know from a culture perspective, and all the agencies will tell you, that we have the best in the business, and now we can match that up and let our marketing folks go out there and recruit the best and the brightest based on the financials. And once they get here, we know we will keep them given the culture that we have here in Chesterfield County. So if there's any questions, I would ask that we have the representatives from the three agencies. We have Dan Kelly here from police, Chief Center, and Sheriff Leonard here. If there are any questions about this particular piece or really any other portions of the public safety budget, and that's a huge part of what we do. We did get to hear from schools, and we wanted to extend the same opportunity to them. So they're here. They can come to the table however you would like it. If you have questions for our public safety leadership, they are here to field those for you.
Ms. Winslow.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have questions for our public safety leadership. They're doing a great job, but I do think that this just shows where resources are going in this budget, and it does so in a very public way. We know we have a national T-shirt shortage. We know we have in some pockets of the country and some here police officer shortage, firemen. It's been difficult to recruit our folks. So. Our 911, we have some folks, I was just jotting this down because I saw this the other day. We have some localities who may or may not be our neighbors who, when you call 911, you don't necessarily connect with anyone. And so we want to make sure that doesn't happen here. There's things we're doing. We're investing in people in this budget, and these charts show that. And I'm delighted that we were able to do this. And I think that it's extremely important for this fiscal year to make a statement in this regard. So this is really, and Mr. Durkin, this is really well done. And I know your team over here has done a great job with this. So thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Engel.
Just to add a little bit to Mr. Winslow, our 911 operators are very important to the county, and we have led the effort in the state to add them to the retirement program for public safety that all of the other areas that we mentioned are already included in. And although we were unsuccessful this year, we do believe in July of next year they will be able to be added to that public safety retirement program. And I'm very proud that we care about our first responders, including our communications department, to be able to lead that effort in the state.
Any other board members? One comment to our public safety team, as Mr. Winslow said. I think we've said it before. We'll say it again. You hear it always from me that I think the men and women that we employ to provide these services for our community are just top notch. And that starts good. Some people may differ with me on this, but it starts at leadership, and it starts on the culture that's baked in from the leadership, from the top all the way on down, and what the expectations that are set of our employees. And I want this to go on record because some people may believe that we are, based on what we're talking about, that we're fully funding everything in the county. And I'm not sure if that's in the next slide deck or not, but it might be. We're not. There are things that our public safety leaders have asked for and other departments have asked for that we're not funding. As I said earlier, we don't have an unlimited pot of money here, but we do take opportunities with end-of-year dollars if there are some things that are one-time expenses that we do try and fund. And so certainly, to your extent to the public safety, that if there is something that comes up and we have dollars that we can do something with as at the end of the year, we certainly are going to take a look at that. But I don't want people in the community to think that we're funding everything completely because we're not. We have to show some fiscal restraint, and it's not just on public safety, but all departments. And I guess that's probably the next slide deck. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We will. We're going to wrap up with just that thought, but appreciate the prompt for sure.
I just want to ask him: is there anything? Because you're here and you've sat through this whole presentation. Is there anything that y'all would like to add to any of what we've talked about from either the sheriff, Lieutenant Colonel Kelly, or Chief Center?
I think it needs to be clear we're not recruiting. We can't get recruits. The pay plan adjustment that we made 2 years ago, going to 3 years.
Do you want to come up to a mic, sir? So everybody at home can hear you. Us too.
All right, I am Sheriff Carl Leonard, Chesterfield County. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that we are struggling, and I don't want to speak for the police department, but I think I do. We cannot recruit for our academies. We're getting a lot of applications. I think it's for people to mark a check mark, but when we ask them to come for the testing, they're not coming. For 100 and some applications we hold a test every time we have 100 so applications, physical test, written test. We sent the letters out to all of those applications on February 24th for our testing. 18 people said they would be there. Right? We had 7 people show up. We had 5 people pass. One has already been automatically disqualified. So we have 3 people going in the background, which is a very lengthy progress. So we are struggling to bring people in. What the pay plan did was get us to keep people who were otherwise think we're going to leave in the last 3 years, 2 years, and this year. We've been able to keep them, but we are not getting people through the door recruiting wise. I've got an academy in now with just 11 people. It should be 25. I think the police department just graduated one with 7. So those don't, by the time those people cross the stage and get their certificate, more than them have left the organization. So we work at net losses. And we eventually got to address this recruiting end. We're not getting people in. I know from the sheriff's office, and I don't want to talk again for you, Dan, if you want to.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Hello, everyone. My name's Dan Kelly, Deputy Chief of Police for Chesterfield. To piggyback on what the sheriff just said, we're down 63% in our applications from calendar year 17 to calendar year 22. And we have academies now that have 5 to 7 in them and we used to have 20 to 25. It is very difficult. So, one, I want to say thank you to the board. I want to say thank you to all the staff who have worked very hard over the last couple of years working on the public safety pay plan, because it has helped us retain our people. And I think it has helped us to stay competitive within the region. I know you've seen the different reports that have been going on across the country. I mean, we are facing competition now where departments are advertising $40,000 sign-on bonuses. So it's very difficult, and the market is really driving this. And the issues that policing face every day and public safety face every day are driving this. So we're going to have to become very smart on how we do things. We're going to have to do things, I think, differently. I think Mary Martin Selby's department and Mr. Durkin and county administration and you all have been very flexible with us when we come to you mid-year and say, we have this threat and we also have this opportunity, right? The threat is we're losing people in this particular situation, but the opportunity might be to hire part-time police officers that can come in and do those types of things if we can't fill the roles with full-time. So we can keep our full-time officers out there doing law enforcement work. We can do things like having our police service aid program, which right now we are funded at 22 positions. That's going to grow by 3. We like to think that hopefully we can be flexible as we go through budget processes to say, if we have 20 people willing to be police service aides and we can't hire police officers, maybe it's something we can do, right? Because they handled over 11,000 calls last year. So when you start thinking about, the time that a police officer would have had to spend on those types of calls and freed them up to do public safety work, as in preservation of life and protecting the vulnerable, right? And not have to be on another traffic crash directing traffic for an officer who's working the crash. We can have that public safety or police service aide directing that traffic. So a couple examples of, as we move forward, how are we going to do things? And yes, we still need to bring in the frontline law enforcement personnel, fire department personnel, who are going to take that call and be able to respond. Because without that, the feeling of safety in our community is going to go down, and that's the last thing, in my opinion, that we want to see happen. We want our people to say they're safe in Chesterfield, and we want our people here to live here and work here, say they feel safe in Chesterfield, that we want them to be here. And our county's growing. We all know that it's growing at an exponential rate, really, even in today. And so that's just going to have more demands on services all throughout the county and with public safety as we move forward. So, yeah, we have to do something to get people through the door. I really don't know what that is. We have a lot of different ideas, but we're not sitting in that kitchen table at night, in those homes where people are having those discussions when someone says, I think I'd like to go into public safety. And then all those pressures that come in from family and what about this, what about that? So how do we reach the hearts and minds of people across this country and across Central Virginia to get people to come in and work for us? We're actively really trying to make some inroads with that. And you're going to see some things coming with us, and I'm sure with the Sheriff's Department, Fire Department, on how we can improve our ability to attract people to come here. And it's one of those things where it's going to take partnerships, because we as agencies aren't going to be able to do that all by ourselves. And by partnerships, I mean, we always say in the police department anyway that everyone's a recruiter. We should be trying to get everybody in. And we're going to extend that out to our community. I might be jumping ahead on a couple things for Colonel Katz. So Colonel Katz, still want to work here, but jumping ahead maybe a little bit for you, but I mean, it's a great idea where we start, talking to our religious community, to our civic organizations to say, everyone's a recruiter. We want a safe community. Do you know someone who would be a great firefighter? Do you know someone who would be a great deputy or a police officer? ECC, dispatcher. Tell them to come look us up, and our recruiters would be glad to talk with them. So those kind of things, it's going to have to happen. And I think with the generosity and the hard work that's put in by the board and the staff here in Chesterfield, I think that we're on the right track to do that. And I was just getting that message out and being able to do that. But we are having a really tough time right now, and we're going to be 30 vacancies here at the end of this month, which we haven't been at in a long time. Now, we do have some academies coming up, but as soon as they come in, people are going out. So all that said, didn't mean to take up that much time, but it's a very complicated matter, and it's going to require, I think, everybody putting our heads together and making things work. But I really think here in Chesterfield we can do that. I think what we have here is special, and we're going to be able to work through this. So thank you for the pay plan. Thank you for always looking out for us for the technology and the equipment we need, and we're going to keep moving forward. Chief Center.
Thank you, Colonel.
Well, good afternoon, Lloyd Center Fire and EMS Chief, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for your kind comments today and all of the support that you give public safety throughout the year. I want to thank Mr. Harris and ultimately Dr. Casey for their efforts to include some additional funds in the public safety budgets, primarily for compensation and, as you'll hear in a few minutes, staffing that we've so desperately needed for many years. We couldn't do it without you, and this will allow us to continue to maintain competitiveness in this market and to reduce the number of times that we have to call our members in to work mandatory overtime. And so that's going to be greatly appreciated. I was also encouraged to hear that the ECC will be included in some of these pay adjustments as well. As you know, when a resident is experiencing the worst day of their life, the first person they contact is an ECO in that 911 center. And that makes a difference in getting the resources out the door, the appropriate people there in a timely manner to resolve that situation and help that resident in need. And our ECC is having a real challenge recruiting and retaining folks, and we want to make sure that they have the tools at their disposal. So again, thank you for your continued support, and we look forward to the next year.
Thank you, Chief. Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I've listened to these folks speak, and what they're speaking to being underfunded, under-personneled, and kind of the way I think about things is what are the things that we need in our county that are going to provide safety and make lives easier for all of our residents. So I think about clean air, I think about clean water, and then I think about public safety, and then I think about education. It's kind of like my order. If I make everything a priority, then I have none. So what are the priorities? So what concerns me, or what gives me pause, and I wasn't on the board, so I wasn't part of that promise, so to speak, but we're going to be returning $12.9 million to the community. And I understand that, and I get the promise, but I wasn't here. But it feels like to me the bang for the buck is to take that money and to add it to signing bonuses. Mr. Harris was saying, each person would get an average of $125, of which a part of that's going to be heading not just to those real estate for homes, but also to commercial. So it slows me down a little bit in that that money, I think, might be able to be used in a better, smarter way. And I'm unsure how to do that, Mr. Harris, and what that would look like, but I'm just wondering, at this point, it's just a wondering, as to, is there a better way to use that money?
Well, Dr. Miller, I think it was Dan Kelly that referenced the fact that, and we've said it 10 times here today, that the process itself does allow for other opportunities. I mean, this is the single biggest investment in public safety pay, what we're talking about here today. Certainly you hear a lot of concerns and challenges related to recruitment. We are responding to that with this budget measure. So I think as we, perhaps see what that does, but does it prevent us throughout the course of the year as we get economic data and see how we're tracking, see what the state does? Are there other opportunities to add to what's been talked about here? Absolutely. I think we have that track record to be responsive 12 months out of the year and not 3. So we take that feedback to heart, and we will look for those opportunities as they present themselves. But we haven't seen this is only 12 hours old, what we're going through here. So I think we see what effect that has on overall recruitment and then respond accordingly.
Thank you.
All right, so another component of the pyramid is, obligations that we have already incurred as a county. Unsurprisingly, I've presented this chart before, but inflation is really biting our contracts in particular, and costs of services and stuff that we buy for our operations. It's been reaching a 40-year high. It's starting to trend a little downward, but still remains elevated. To that end, you will see in our 5-year plan, we fund all our contractual obligations. The very first thing that we do as part of fiscal year 24's budget, that contract growth totals about $2.5 million. You can see all the departments on there, going from IST to general services to human resources. Other things that we have in our 5-year plan are items that were initiated a few years ago that the general fund is now having to pick up. I won't walk through every one of these that are on this slide. The first one is the biggest one as part of this fiscal year 24 budget. In 2020, the police department was awarded a COPS federal grant that funded 15 positions. That funding is running out in fiscal year 23, and the general obligation is having to pick up that tab in fiscal year 24 and moving forward. In terms of the CIP, which we'll get into in a few minutes, we are adding some operating and personnel costs for the expansion of Midlothian Library, some operating dollars for new materials in 8 positions, and then operating and personnel costs for the new Beulah Recreation Centre, which is expected to open in the second quarter of this year. So once we fund those prior year obligations, what's left? When you come back to that pyramid slide, 0.4% of the entire general fund budget is left for additional enhancements for consideration by the board. Recognizing, to your point earlier, Mr. Ingle, about deferring some of our initiatives in fiscal year 24 to help give additional resources to our schools, you will see as part of this budget a kind of 2-wave cycle. As you may recall, in fiscal year 21, we had a kind of tier structure when we were facing that downturn from COVID. We're kind of taking a similar approach. One, again, to aid in that transfer to schools, but also, we recognise and we're very cognizant of a kind of influx situation with regards to the economy. We don't want to put new initiatives on the street that we may then have to take back if the economic situation turns south. So you can see those 2 waves. Wave 1 will be initiated July 1, the very first day of fiscal year 24's budget, with Wave 2 being implemented in January of 2024. Wave 1 will cost about $1.5 million, with Wave 2 costs expected to be about $2.6 million.
And Dr. Miller, I think that this wave concept is new. I mean, this is what kind of this vertical budgeting plan within a plan. But that's where we have an opportunity now built in from a process perspective where we can come back mid-year and say, okay, here's what's scheduled to go in, here's the revenue update. Are there other things that have arisen since the budget was adopted in April? You heard Mr. Carroll talk about, on the tax relief side, kind of going the other way, but those opportunities are now built into this plan with multiple check-in points throughout the year. And the WAVE concept, I think, will deliver on what you're asking for, at least have the opportunity to have that conversation. So in terms of some of the Wave 1 highlights, is sort of building on that concept. This is, just want to spend a minute here. This has been work that's been in place for a number of years and really dates back to a citizen request and requirement that came to be a number of years ago, and that was the growing role that FOIA plays in the organization and our ability and desire to be as responsive to that as possible. So we created a number of years ago an actual FOIA position. It's something that had been done in pieces and parts, and Mr. Good, who's sitting over there, led that effort. And organically, over the course of the last couple of years, that has turned into the Office of Constituent Services by collecting other pieces around, really the fifth floor and recognizing a lot of the synergies and overlaps that existed between the clerk's office, between folks in county administration, Mr. Good, and we formed the Office of Constituent Services really last year by collecting all those pieces and, again, getting all of the efficiencies that came with that. We have continued to build onto that concept, and we're announcing today with this plan the formal merger of communications and media and the constituent services offices into the Office of Constituent and Media Services. They're a very creative bunch with their naming rights, but turning it's 4 or 5 functions that now fall under the leadership of a single director, which would be Mr. Good. All the communications and media folks would be under there. Ms. Boniface would be overseeing that portion of it, as well as all the board support functions, the clerk functions, the FOIA office, all under this piece. And it allows for a more streamlined leadership structure and recognizes, again, that we were doing a lot of these kinds of functions in different little silos, and we have been able to create incredible synergies. And I think you see it in your evening board sessions and all the community meetings that we're now able to support. Again, not by growing staff per se, but really by just reorganizing the resources that we had. That being said, I think we do recognize over the course of the last year, the media outlets, the media environment has changed dramatically in Chesterfield County with the closure of some outlets that covered county topics. So this budget in Wave 1 does include additional resources to fill some of that gap and to make sure that we are getting information out, whether it be budgetary, on a capital project, whatever the subject matter may be, that we have those proper channels. And this new structure will house some of that. So some of the things that are in here, the top one is the web quality assurance analyst. That is just a fancy title for someone that is looking at our county website from a quality control perspective, from a user's perspective. Is the information up to date? Is it in a place that makes sense? This is happening in a very decentralized fashion right now. We had our emerging senior leaders program was organized around this topic for how we could improve some of these things. This is one of their recommendations to create this position that is really dedicated. I mean, it's our most above all else, our website is our most powerful tool to get information to people, but we don't have this resource that really goes through and makes sure that it is up to date, uniform experience. No matter what you're coming there for, it's easy to find the information. They will have other roles, but that would be one of the primary pieces of this. The part-time photographer, this is really the conversion. We have it on a contractual basis now. We would like to bring that in-house. The pictures are a great storytelling tool. Again, the evening sessions, show the power of that. All these presentations that we do for you, and we'd have this resource in-house. And again, this would serve the entire county housed here, but really something we would roll out to departments. And then a part-time position to help with digital content creation. Certainly our social media channels have been a very powerful tool for us, and the more, that's just the nature of the business, the more information that you can push out through those channels, the more following you'll get and the more powerful amplification you get from that effect. So Mr. Good and Ms. Boniface are here if there's any questions, but again, this is a multi-year effort. We're proud of the formation of this office, and I think it's been done in a very responsible way, sort of collecting from the talent that was already here, supplementing in a few key places, but at the end of the day, providing the community with much better information about what's going on in their community.
One of the other major initiatives as part of Wave 1 is funding for our waste and recycling centre enhancements. You all took the action, I believe, last month to waive the first half recycling fee, and we will be ending our contract with CVWMA. That means that we will no longer be in that kind of middle person role for that funding and contractual for recycling services. But that doesn't mean that the county as a whole is stepping back from its recycling and environmental efforts. As part of this fiscal year 24 budget, we are returning both convenience centres back to 7-day operations. That will be aided by the addition of 8 personnel to be able to enable that service. There will be site improvements to ensure that the traffic queues are kept to a minimum and that there's plenty of access to those recycling areas. In addition to that, there will be free drop-off recycling at designated county parks throughout the area, free seasonal leaf disposal, and looking for ways to kind of offset some of those costs. We are looking at a potential federal grant opportunity. These enhancements will kick in July 1, but recognising that some of this takes time to get it built up and ready by then. As part of fiscal years 23 projections, we have included the kind of base infrastructure cost to get these up and running, so this service is available as soon as possible by July 1 of fiscal year 24. So moving on to Wave 2, which will be implemented on January 1st. I will go through a couple of these. The biggest component of that is fire minimum staffing. There has been a lot of overtime costs, mandatory overtime in the fire department over the last few years. The addition of 36 positions will get them to their desired minimum staffing level. With that being effective in January, that is actually 1 year ahead of what we had anticipated when we were back building fiscal year 23's budget. The fiscal year cost for 24 is about $1.8 million, with that full year cost being picked up through that 5-year plan in 25 and beyond. The Police Real-Time Crime Centre, we talked about federal funds earlier, capitalising on that investment that we made with the American Rescue Plan Act. The Crime Centre project was developed to use data analytics to respond in a more timely fashion to incidents. The funding that's on the screen there for $300,000 will kick in January 1st, and it'll allow the police department to continue and increase subscriptions for the software that they need. And then, as Mr. Harris said a few moments ago, when we come back and look at the economic and financial landscape in January of fiscal year 24, there are plans that, if the picture is better than we'd anticipated, to continue with addition of 3 police service aides, and then also plans for 5 traffic enforcement officers to bolster the traffic enforcement division of the police department. Other Wave 2 highlights as part of the 5-year plan for the last 2 or 3 years, moving that part-time to full-time ratio for the libraries. As you'll recall, the kind of part-time to full-time ratio was 66% part-time to a third of full-time. This will be a continuation of that to get that ratio inverted. With all of the increased capacity, as you referenced, Mr. Carroll, with CVTA, the amount of projects that we're able to jumpstart now with that additional funding source, that places a heavier burden on our transportation department. So this budget does include funding for a senior transportation engineer to make sure that we can continue with those projects in a timely fashion. And then I'm going to jump to the last point of building and grounds. We've been adding approximately 1 FTE for the last few years to keep up with our buildings and grounds throughout the county rather than relying on contracted services. By bringing that service in-house, we'll be able to decrease the contractual costs that we have on that and generate some efficiency savings as well. So moving on to our other funds, first one on the slide there you can see is mental health. General fund contribution to the mental health fund is going to be $15.6 million as part of fiscal year 24's budget. That is an increase of about 2.1% or a little over $327,000. You can see some of the additional services that they will provide as part of that budget. And Ms. Freed is here if you have any questions on that. There are funding in here for a peer recovery specialist position that was originally funded through the State Opioid Response Program. That funding has been reduced and the county is now stepping forward to pick up that tab. There are increase in residential aid positions for overnight shifts in the facilities to make sure that there is adequate coverage and levels of care. There is an infant case manager who will assist with mandated services that cannot be contracted out to third parties. The cost of that position will actually be recovered from revenue from the services and annual grant funding. Moving on to utilities, the average increase to the both bi-monthly bills is going to be 2.9%. There are additional 6 positions requested as part of this fiscal year 24 budget, primarily centred around principal plant operators and water quality technicians and utility workers. So kind of looking at that 5-year plan beyond 24, what are some of the other things that are coming down the line as we move out into the out years? Mental health will be implementing an electronic health records system. The general fund, as part of the transfer to mental health, will be contributing to the cost of the ongoing contract of that program for about $250,000 a year. Coming back to that use of federal funds, with the ARPA funds, we were able to stand up a peak demand ambulance service. Once that ARPA funds run out, the general fund will begin to take those costs on. That will be approximately about $500,000 a year. The Circuit Court Clerk has been spearheading an initiative for a digital evidence management system. They've been working with a vendor and our IST department to stand up that system. The estimated cost of that when it starts in fiscal year 25 is approximately about $285,000 that the general fund will have to pick up. There will be obviously efficiencies with that, with multiple agencies being able to use that system, but that is an operating cost that we will have to pick up in order to maintain that service. And then finally, on this list, you will see the ERP, or the financial system that Mr. Harris referenced earlier. That is $13 million to implement that over 2 years that is in our CIP. But there will be an ongoing annual subscription cost that we will have to pick up for that system. It is going to be a little over $2 million per year. That will kick in approximately fiscal year 26. But again, a cost, this really shows the benefit of that 5-year plan. We can see things that are coming and we can build it in to make sure that everything that we propose today, both on revenue and expenses, are done in a very fiscally conservative and sustainable manner.
The final chapter of our story, I think, is hopefully the one that you know the best already. And again, that's the way we want it. No surprises. Nowhere should that be more true than it is the capital plan. Many of these things have been around for the better part of a decade in terms of discussion. So major themes in here: historic investments in transportation, and that's again really a product of the last 4 or 5 years. The additional funding sources, the conversion of that vehicle registration fee to a CIP source for transportation. The referendum, it's one thing to get the approval in November. We are moving forward on that. We'll give a quick update of where we are. The ERP system is I'm a little bit biased, but it's absolutely critical to everything that we do, and we are able to make big investments there. And then major maintenance, again, probably the driest topic here, but something if we don't get that right, a lot of things start to suffer. This is a funding source summary slide, and again, you don't need to see anything here other than the fact that there are a lot of squares and there are generally, the same shape or similar shapes. And what that represents, what it means, why it's important, is the fact that you have a diverse funding structure for your CIP. We just passed a very large referendum, the biggest in the county's history, yet this chart here is not dominated by debt. You are not putting this CIP on the credit card. You are maintaining the absolute most important principle of a AAA, and that is you have a very balanced capital strategy. And so you see all of the different sources that go in here, and we are not overly reliant, again, on debt. Where are we spending those funds? You see the orange and sort of the greenish color there on the left-hand side. That represents transportation. That represents a major shift in the way that we have done capital planning over the last 15 or 20 years. And we got a slide coming up here in a second, thought it was the next one, that really shows where we were from in FY20 in terms of a total CIP investment in transportation to where we are now. And we will go through that in more detail here in a second. So referendum roadmap, again, if there's anything that is dependent on a process, it's just that. We spent the better part of 3 or 4 years building that project, less vetting it with the community. We had a very successful result in November. 76% of the folks approving the plan. We will be in the marketplace in May of this year with that first grouping of projects, and then what's laid out here for the first time for the board to really approve is the official lineup of those referendum projects over a 7-year window. Again, I think, could we speed that up a little bit? Sure. I think 7 years is really sort of that sweet spot. You can go out to 10 with some additional permissions from the from the courts. We don't think we'll need that, but we are shooting for 7. So for the first time, we are laying out those projects. The projects have been selected by the voters. It's the sequencing of them over the 7-year period that's really the nuance for this particular CIP. And here they are represented. You see each moving piece of that, beginning in FY23, Chester Fire Station, the Fallen Creek Police Station, which is down at Eastern Midlothian, and the other projects in 23, and then how the layout over the remaining 6 years of this referendum period in a very balanced way between $18 and $25 million of debt each year. What that provides us is exactly what we talked about when we were on the referendum trail, a debt service curve that does not choke out all of the other things. Mr. Durkin just talked about his out-year highlights. Debt service was not really on that list because we managed this in an effective way with that focus on paying the same amount of premium every year, so that it gives us that nice fall off, and you see that here in the outer years of this plan. So this is updated with the 7-year structure that we just went through. You see a little bit of increase in the first couple of years. That's to be expected. But overall, a very flat profile, and then you start to see it fall off. And we'll be sitting in here before you know it in the next 5 to 6 years talking about the skeleton outline of the next referendum. One point that gets a lot of traction, and it's it really shows up on the capital side, is the amount of growth occurring in the county. And I think there's a lot of definitions of growth. So we partnered with Mr. Smith and his folks and threw some data in here that I thought was interesting. So this is certificates of occupancy issued on an annual basis. It's a stacked bar graph. You see a multifamily and a single family component. And what you see is really during the recession and even the 4 or 5 years coming out of there, sort of a real slow pace in terms of new units being put on the ground. You've had some increases, some upticks the last couple of years, but if you look historically, and I think that's one of the things that kind of gets lost in this topic, it's not an unprecedented period of new units being added in Chesterfield County. And if you really take into account the deficit that was created during the downturn in those following years, we were probably still in a deficit position up against hitting that 2,500 units a year average, which is what's plotted there in the line across the graph. So yes, there has been an uptick in new units going on the ground, but historically, not like anything we haven't seen before. And if you take a 10-year view on it, you certainly can make the argument that some of that is catch-up for what didn't happen during the last recession. You look at that spatially, I think this is an interesting topic. Certainly as you're putting and plotting where capital facilities are going to go, where have those COs been issued for the last 10 years? And Mr. Carroll's probably no surprise to him that he sees some red out there in Western Hull Street. But I think the more interesting part of this chart is a fairly balanced mix other than that across. I mean, we know that you have sort of the rural boundary in the southern half of the county, but in the more urbanized portions of the county, sort of the top half, it's a fairly spread out mix over the last 10 years. So from a capital planning perspective, there's certainly going to be an intense investment that on the school side, on the county side, in that Western Hull Street corridor. But I think what this says to us as capital planners, we need to make sure that we are investing in facilities all across the county. And Mr. Holland is a great example with the Dale Elementary School, and we went through the same exercise on the student generation side, and you see sort of a more even growth pattern when you look at the data than when you just sort of drive around or if you listen to some of the talking points that get bantered about. That being said, this is a map just of the referendum itself, and I think it matches up pretty well with what we just saw on the prior slide. You see a heavy investment in the Western Hull Street. Makes sense. That's the growth frontier for us in terms of, newer neighborhoods. But overall, we tried to find an even spread from referendum projects. And this doesn't cover all of the other things that the CIP will do over the next 5 to 7 years, but the referendum itself I think lines up pretty well with the actual growth trends that we're seeing, and it just sort of takes it into account that, again, the growth over the last couple of years has not been historic by any stretch. So just running through the components of the referendum, I know you know these very well. You have the 3 library facilities of $45 million, Enon being the first one out of the gates there. That's a fiscal 24 project. You heard Mr. Durkin talking about the operating components coming back. That's really a byproduct of the increase in the footprint there. There will be some added cost to get that as a comparable facility to what we have elsewhere in the county. Fire station in Chester, the first one out of the ground there, $42 million. Again, a nice mix of rehabilitations, reinvestment, and replacement stations. No real added capacity, but this is sort of that major maintenance in its purest form, going in and making sure that we are taking care of these facilities. Again, Chester, the first one out. That will be part of the 23 sale we will do this spring. Parks and Rec, again, we had a balanced strategy there. Horner and River City, the first pieces of that. We will see some of the conservation area development coming out of the ground with 24. That's a sale that was likely to occur unless the rate environment change next spring. But we are the message on the referendum across the board is we are being very active. We are going to be 6 months from yes to go through all budget process, have the projects plotted out, and be at the table selling bonds in late May. Police precincts, Fallen Creek or the Stonebridge area, the first one there in 23, $39 million investment, the largest investment in the history of police precincts. All of these will be county-owned facilities, which is something we do not currently have. I mentioned historic investments in transportation. If you go back to the 5-year total of the 20 to 24 CIP, $114 million. This CIP proposed it's a 5-year total, but $361 million. That is a extremely large increase in this in transportation, almost the third leg of the stool itself. We have heard that, to Mr. Holland's point on the blueprint, that transportation in all forms is absolutely critical to this community, and this budget really responds to that call. Transportation highlights, I'll walk through these here individually in 1 second. The biggest headline, of course, and we talked about this yesterday, is the county's effort to move the Powhite Parkway extension project forward with Phase 1, which takes it from its current terminus out to Woolrich Road. And you see the various pieces and parts of this. We have $153 million in this plan. It's approximately $17 million already on the books. This number is going to move around. I'm just going to tell you, we know that. Mr. Smith required me to say that to you, but it still represents the largest movement by the county to not just wait around for state and federal partners to get this project going. You see the funding mix, a healthy mix. There is some debt in here. There's some reserves from the Centerpoint District. There's some local CVTA dollars that are programmed over this period of time. You see the timeline. This I think really warrants its own standalone session, but I think really represents for the first time in a long time us not just talking about the POIT, but putting it in a plan and funding it to the tune of $153 million on top of what's already been done, and continuing to work with our state and federal partners. I think the one thing we've heard from all the folks that we've talked to is your case is all the more compelling if you can show that you are making your own local investments into this project and not just asking, for money. So we really took that feedback to heart, as well as the economic development benefits of this overall project and the quality of life to get the traffic flow going a couple of different directions. Just a quick schematic, you see what Phase 1 entails. That, again, not the whole project, but it definitely gets it moving, $153 million. The rest of the transportation piece is really broken down in a couple of categories. These are projects that are funded by a vehicle registration fee or just general road dollars, and some really important things. It's a $5 million a year sidewalk development program. I think when we set this out, Mr. Winslow was a big advocate of this a couple years ago. We were struggling to get to $1 million a year, and we've got that bumped up to $5 million a year across the duration of this. Sidewalks are expensive. That won't, we're not going to build a sidewalk from Enon to Midlothian with that, but it is a major increase in our investment in that particular piece. School access improvements is something that you all have made really important. This is bus turnarounds to make those safer, to make sure we can get kids further down particular roads, and ingress and egress, providing additional exits and entrances at some schools. Police did that work. You had a work session in the fall. We have some design money that you already put in place, and this is to add some capital dollars to that so we can activate once those plans are ready to go. And then the courthouse road extension, that $2.4 million represents the sale of the courthouse landing property. And as we said, as we went through that process, that would be reinvested into that project. That's not the entire budget, but it does appropriate it and get that important project moving forward. You see some of the examples of other local CVTA projects, village corridor improvements that are appropriated as part of this plan. You've had some work sessions, and you know a good bit about this. The largest component of the local CVTA 424 is, of course, a contribution to the POIT project that we just walked through. Revenue sharing update. So this is an interesting one. As you know, it is not in the state budget for 23 or 24. They're saying that it will come back for 25 and beyond. So what staff is, this is sort of a little bit of a work in progress, but you have $5 million of local funds appropriated in 23, and this plan does leave the $5 million in 24 of the local half. So it's a $10 million program. What's not there essentially is the half from the state. What we would recommend doing, recognizing that a lot of these road projects from a bid perspective have come in excess of what we were expecting, to leave this local $10 million as a contingency plan for a lot of these key road projects, whether it be the POIT or whatever else comes in. You've got a bank, and then also you don't create a structural hole in your budget for 25. Hopefully the state comes back to the table with revenue sharing, and then that money is already there, and you're not having to pull 5 out, put 5 back in. Major maintenance, this speaks for itself. Maybe better than any particular graph in this presentation of the iterative nature. We set a goal, we get to it, and we have a 2.5% policy of replacement value of all of our buildings, and we have met that, and then some. $70 million over this 5 years dedicated into the major maintenance category. This is an absolute success story, and I think representative of so many, the compensation, so many other things we've seen here today. Taking this multi-year approach, having a goal, getting there, and then maintaining it is really sort of the DNA of this organization from a financial planning perspective. ERP, I can't go without talking about that again. This is our financial system, payroll, budget, timekeeping, accounting, all the purchasing items, you name it. The system that we have in place today dates back to 06, 07, 08. So it has far exceeded its useful life. We are going through the process now to select a vendor. We will bring that contract to the board. We have $13 million set aside over the next two budgets to pay for this. You don't pay for it all up front. It is a cash project. We will see where the bids come back in. We feel like 13 is a pretty good number, but it's still a story to be told with you all in terms of when we bring that project back. But this is a vital resource that will modernize the way we do all of these functions. It's a shared resource, county and schools. To Mr. Carroll's point from a little while ago, this does not fund all of the things that have been brought to our attention throughout this process. Everything that is listed here is broken out in great detail in the budget document from an operational perspective. Just on the county side, $15 million essentially, and then the CIP at $850 million. All of those details are in there, but certainly I think this board has placed heavier emphasis on this part of the story, that no budget serves all the needs. We don't draw up the revenue to match what we need on the expense side. We try to find that balance. That does leave things out, and that is provided to you in your budget books, and it is available for the community on the website. And then as an homage to our county administrator far away, we have a few one-liners to wrap you up. Mr. Durkin will close us up for us.
On the left-hand side, you can see some allocations that will be considered as part of our fiscal year 2023 end-of-year results of operations. There are some potential capital investments with some of the additional funding requests that we get can be one-time in nature. Our proposal would be to replace some of the election equipment at the registrar's office. Some items, that they can impact the fiscal year 24 budget that are not in there because we believe they can be handled outside of that process and not eat up capacity as part of fiscal year 24's budget, is things like our unassigned fund balance contribution. We have to maintain that 8% level. The board over the last couple of years has traditionally done that as part of a year-end item. With the growth in our budget, we would have to do that again. That would probably be about $2.6 to $2.7 million of contribution that would have to happen at fiscal 23 year's end to remain in compliance. With the implementation of the adjustments to public safety salaries, there is a slight drawdown in this budget to their pay reserve. As part of the policy that the board adopted back in 2020, we would have to replenish those funds using the surplus as part of that appropriation category. An ancillary knock-on effect of adjusting those salaries are the kind of long-term liability costs associated with those. We had to make some one-time adjustments to our SRP plan about a year or two ago for about $5 million. We expect that we'd have to do something like that again to maintain our funded ratios as part of those plans. And as I referenced earlier with the waste and resource centres, the one-time cost to get that infrastructure up and running would be considered to be funded as part of this year's budget. And then looking over that kind of 5-year plan horizon, we do like to contribute to a revenue stabilisation fund. As Mr. Harris referenced, when we go to the markets in May, that is one of the things that they look at. So they always like to see that we are contributing to that so that we have a hedge against any potential future drawdown, economic downturn rather. And then kind of come back to that transportation with the revenue sharing, just a general inflationary hedge if inflation does last longer than what is being anticipated right now. And then the kind of mechanics of that one-time real estate tax credit. This evening there is an item to set a public hearing to amend the code. On March 22nd would be to hold that public hearing and with a vote on April 5th, with it then being applied to the bills that would be due on June 5th. And then finally, as referenced earlier, this is one of the stepping stones as part of this budget heading towards adoption on April 5th. We have community meetings, first one starting tomorrow in Midlothian Middle School, culminating in the Matoaka District on March 21st with a Facebook Live event on March 16th. We will have the budget public hearings on March 22nd, then with budget adoption on April 5th to then be enacted on July 1.
That concludes our presentation. Any questions that the board members might have?
Mr. Holland.
No. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just want to thank you for the presentation here, and I was looking for it, and I always like to look at the required general fund balance, and I see we're now about $70.8 million, which should be really useful as interest rates rise. Hopefully we'll earn more money on that, and that can be an opportunity to fund some needs that we have up and coming as well. So I'll be looking at the cash flow analysis relative to interest income and what we can do in other opportunities with that. But also, I always like to emphasize the importance of being frugal, cost savings wise. I realize when you look at a budget, you always can look for opportunities to save money and to reduce costs, and therefore generate savings that can be used in other critical needs and critical services for the county. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Any other board members? Thank you for that very, very, very thorough presentation.
Mr. Chair, if I may, even though it's Matt and I have been up here presenting today, I really would be remiss if I didn't thank the budget staff. Two of them are here today. You have Shane Hill, who is our operating budget lead, and Ryan Reese, who is our capital improvement program lead. But there are another 7 bodies downstairs who have worked over these last few months. There have been many late nights and phone calls and text messages going around to get this budget proposal that is in front of you today. So I would like to thank them. And I know that this is being recorded, so this will be held against me till the end of time. But I would also like to thank the person sitting to my left, Mr. Harris. He has been a tremendous support throughout this whole process, not just for me, but for the entire team. And I really can't thank him enough for everything he's done for us.
That only cost me $20, Mr. Chair.
That's a good bargain right there. I will say that y'all have worked great with us. You've reacted and replied to our requests to get us the information on how structuring some of these things, and we know how much work that was, and sometimes how much we may drive you a little crazy certain times of the day. So, or night, or morning. But thank you very much. We appreciate it. If there's no other questions, Madam Clerk.